What if the canned soup sitting in your pantry right now could send you straight to the emergency room? Sounds dramatic. The FDA issued more than 40 recalls on processed foods just in the past 6 months. And yes, canned soups were right in the mix. Some of them weren't just bland or boring. They were leaking, spoiled, or hiding ingredients that could trigger severe allergic reactions. Yet they're still being sold across the country, often in bulk at stores people trust the most. So here's the kicker. Are these brands cutting corners? Are we just being fed sodium bombs dressed up as comfort food? Soup isn't supposed to leave you wondering if it's going to hurt your stomach or spike your blood pressure to dangerous levels. But when one label lists over 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serving and another fails to disclose allergens entirely, it's not just sloppy, it's reckless. And if you think it only happens with off-brand labels, think again. Some of the most iconic names in American cupboards are on this list. Let's get into it. Number 1, Campbell's Soup Company.
Campbell's Soup has voluntarily recalled more than 4,100 pounds of chicken soup product.
Campbell's isn't just soup, it's an empire. A corporate giant so deeply woven into American shelves, memories, and dinner tables that calling them out almost feels like treason. But loyalty means nothing when trust starts leaking from the seams. And that's exactly what's been happening. Quietly, consistently, and in plain sight. Start with the classic chicken noodle. It's the face of rainy day comfort. But behind that warm bowl is a sodium count that pushes over 1,000 milligrams per serving. For anyone watching their blood pressure or dealing with heart disease that's not food, that's a red flag. And the kicker, this is the same soup that was once used in marketing to suggest health and simplicity. Now it's sitting on doctors' avoid lists for senior diets. Then there's the creamy mushroom. Sounds innocent, right? Until you read the label and see carrageenan, MSG-related flavor enhancers, and excessive sodium, all packed into one little can. This is a soup people use in casseroles and home-cooked meals across the country. It's hidden in plain sight, loaded with additives that can irritate digestion, especially in older adults or those with autoimmune sensitivities. The tomato soup isn't any better. It's the icon, the grilled cheese partner. But multiple reviews and tests have shown inconsistencies in texture, flavor, and even pH levels. Some cans taste like watered-down ketchup. Others feel acidic enough to trigger heartburn with just a few spoonfuls. And when something that basic can't be consistent, you've got to ask what's happening in the factory. And don't even get started on chunky varieties. Chunky sirloin burger, for example, boasts meaty flavor, but delivers processed beef preservatives and enough sodium to make your fingers swell. This is the can that exploded in someone's kitchen. Remember, not because they microwaved it wrong, but because it was improperly sealed. Imagine serving that to a child or an elderly parent. Imagine the damage. Now take a look at their healthy request line. Sounds responsible. Sensible. But when the FDA reviewed sodium claims, some cans still clocked in close to 700 milligrams per serving. So the promise is low sodium. The reality, just barely lower. A little less salt doesn't make a soup safe. It makes the deception worse. This is how Campbell's operates. By tapping into nostalgia. By selling the idea of warmth and safety, even when their record says otherwise. You don't need a nutritionist to feel when something's off. You open the can. You see a film of oil on top. You smell the metallic undertone. You taste the salt before the chicken. It's subtle at first. Then it becomes undeniable. And here's what really twists the knife. These aren't luxury products. They're the budget choice, the pantry backup, the thing you buy by the dozen because it's cheaper that way, especially for fixed-income households, retirees, people with limited access to fresh groceries. Campbell's knows this. They target that. And instead of prioritizing safety and quality, they cut corners, mask it in design, and distribute through networks that reach the most vulnerable. So no, not every Campbell's soup will hurt you. But when this many products raise eyebrows, get pulled, or deliver disappointment over and over, it's not about flavor anymore. It's about trust. And once that's gone, the label doesn't mean anything. The bowl may still be warm, but the feeling it leaves behind, that's ice cold. Number 2, great value. When a can of soup says great value, what it really means is Walmart. And when Walmart puts its name behind a food product, you would think it's been through the ringer of testing, accountability, and oversight. But the truth is far messier. Great value isn't just another store brand. It's the direct result of one of the most powerful retail systems in the world using its size to flood shelves with food that looks affordable, but often comes with risks nobody talks about until now. Great value soups have popped up on recall lists for packaging defects like cracked seals and bloated cans. These aren't cosmetic issues. A seal that doesn't hold lets in bacteria. It turns the contents into a breeding ground. The soup may look fine at first glance, but inside it's spoiled. And the worst part, these products are still getting stocked in bulk, often in neighborhoods where better options are miles away. Where people rely on that low price point not because they want to, but because they have no other choice. But here's what the label doesn't tell you. Unlike branded companies that are legally bound to disclose their supply chains, great value soups are manufactured by third-party contractors often unnamed. That means you could be eating soup made in one facility today and a completely different one tomorrow. No traceability, no accountability, no clue where the ingredients come from, how they were handled, or who was watching over the process. When something goes wrong, Walmart isn't the one getting inspected. The blame gets passed down to whatever small factory took the contract that week. It goes deeper. Walmart's pricing model pressures manufacturers to cut costs at every turn. Shorter cooking times, cheaper thickeners, lower grade vegetables, more water, less substance. Soup that looks full but barely feeds. You feel like you're getting a deal, but the nutrition says otherwise. Some great value varieties barely reach 4 grams of protein per can. Others contain binders and starches that leave you bloated but undernourished. For seniors, for folks living on limited diets, for anyone managing chronic illness, this isn't just disappointing, it's a setup. Now layer in policy. Walmart's lobbying influence is among the largest in the country. That means while federal regulators try to increase labeling standards or clamp down on misleading packaging, Walmart is in Washington pushing back, quietly, strategically, protecting their supply chain from transparency laws, making sure that a can with barely any beef in the broth can still say beef stew without legal consequence. And they win. Every time. Great value soup is often the first thing families turn to in a crunch. It's what food banks hand out. It's what SNAP shoppers fill their carts with because the price is right. But behind that price is a system that rewards shortcuts, conceals origins, and floods rural and low-income communities with food that barely meets the minimum bar. A system that gives you volume but robs you of trust. And when you think about the long-term effects of eating this stuff, week after week, month after month, it's not just about bad taste. It's about bad outcomes. So next time you see that white and blue label, ask yourself this. If the company doesn't have to tell you where the food comes from, who made it, or what corners were cut to meet that price, is it really worth it? Because when a soup hides more than it reveals, that's not great value. That's a gamble. And it's you they're betting against. Number 3, Chef Boyardee. By now the pattern's impossible to ignore. Oversized promises, undercooked accountability. And it gets even murkier with Chef Boyardee, a brand that has somehow survived decades of scrutiny by banking on nostalgia and convenience. But when you strip away the smiling cartoon chef, what you're left with is a company that feeds off regulatory gaps, corporate complacency, and a public too tired to keep asking questions. Chef Boyardee operates under the banner of Conagra Brands, a conglomerate with a portfolio full of shelf-stable products designed more for profit margins than for nourishment. And while some people still think of this brand as an easy fix for a quick lunch, what's actually inside those cans tells a very different story. What looks like meat-filled ravioli is often made with beef so processed it barely resembles meat at all. Pasta that turns mushy within minutes. Sauces that taste like metal and sugar blended together, and labels that never tell the whole story. Several of Chef Boyardee's canned pasta products have quietly made their way onto warning lists for excessive lead levels in packaging linings. Lead in packaging. For a product that targets school lunches and after-school snacks, that alone should have triggered a massive national outcry, but it barely made a ripple. Why? Because companies like Conagra know how to stretch legal limits without actually breaking them. They know how to work the wording, how to stay just below the threshold of mandatory recall. And while regulators debate decimal points, people keep eating. Behind the scenes, Chef Boyardee thrives in a supply chain filled with shortcuts. They outsource production to multiple plants across the country, many of which run on skeleton crews under pressure to hit quotas that don't allow time for careful inspection. In recent audits, several Conagra facilities failed to meet basic hygiene standards, cross-contamination risks, temperature control issues, pest sightings. These aren't distant memories. These are recent violations, and they're happening in the same places where your next can of Boyardee might be filled. And let's not ignore the impact this has on public health. These cans are loaded with sodium preservatives and low-quality fillers like soy protein concentrate and textured vegetable protein. It's not food meant to nourish. It's food designed to mimic fullness while delivering as little nutritional value as possible. For vulnerable communities, especially older adults living on fixed incomes, this kind of product creates a dangerous illusion of sustenance. A full belly doesn't mean a healthy body. Chef Boyardee is cheap, accessible, and heavily marketed. It appears in school lunch programs. It fills shelves in dollar stores. It's pushed in emergency food boxes and after-school programs. But with that reach comes a responsibility that's been ignored for too long. When a brand has this kind of access to the nation's most economically vulnerable, it should be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. And yet accountability remains elusive. Conagra continues to receive tax breaks and subsidies for keeping production in the U.S., even while their factories rack up food safety violations. They invest more in branding than in ingredient upgrades. They promote nostalgia, but dodge transparency. It's the same formula over and over. So the next time you see that red and yellow label, maybe don't think of childhood comfort. Think of what's actually inside. Think of the ignored warnings, the cheap substitutions, the manufacturing loopholes that keep profits high and standards low. Chef Boyardee may come with a familiar face, but the truth behind the can, that's something they never put on the label. Number 4, Progresso. By now it's clear that the deeper you dig into canned soup, the more disturbing the picture becomes. And what's even more disappointing is when a brand that parades itself as premium ends up cutting from the same cloth. That brings us to Progresso, a name that tries to sound fresh, clean, even a little fancy. But scratch past the label and the polish wears off fast. Owned by General Mills. Progresso markets itself as the healthier alternative. The soups look gourmet on the shelf. Labels show vibrant vegetables and hearty meats, the kind that feel one step away from homemade. But behind the branding lies a formula of cost efficiency and corporate maneuvering that leaves the consumer with more risk than reward. The first issue, ingredient masking. Progresso has repeatedly used vague terms like natural flavorings that under looser FDA guidelines can hide a range of chemical additives. And while other brands have been pressured into listing exactly what's inside, Progresso still skirts the line, relying on lenient labeling laws that benefit large-scale manufacturers. This allows them to make broad health claims without disclosing details that could concern anyone with sensitivities, allergies, or dietary restrictions. Then comes the sourcing. Progresso imports a large portion of its vegetables from international suppliers. Nothing inherently wrong with that, unless those vegetables are grown with pesticides that don't meet U.S. standards or processed in facilities with less oversight. In recent years, several batches were quietly recalled due to undeclared allergens and spoilage concerns, including specific chicken-based soups that had elevated bacterial risk due to improper temperature handling. These incidents didn't go viral, but they should have. Progresso soups also rely heavily on mechanically separated meats in their beef and chicken varieties, a process that allows producers to extract every last bit of flesh from bones using high-pressure machines. While legal, this method creates a texture that's far from natural and often requires extra preservatives to mask the taste. For a product sold as homestyle, that's quite a contradiction. What's especially troubling is the way Progresso maintains its price point. The brand frequently runs deep discount promotions, sometimes dropping the price below that of generic store brands. But that cost difference gets absorbed elsewhere, often by choosing the cheapest possible version of each ingredient, reducing portion sizes without changing packaging, or using synthetic thickeners like modified cornstarch to give the illusion of richness. It's shrinkflation dressed up in marketing. And just like others on this list, Progresso benefits from a supply chain structure that buries responsibility. The company outsources not just ingredients, but also packaging, distribution, and third-party testing. So when issues arise, and they do, the response is slow, vague, and carefully worded. The system protects the brand, not the consumer. This isn't about one bad can or a single recall. It's about a brand that built its reputation on appearing better, cleaner, and healthier, while relying on many of the same industry tricks as everyone else. Progresso's problem isn't what they advertise. It's what they don't. And if a brand hides its shortcuts behind pretty labels and polished language, you have to wonder what else is being hidden. Number 5, Annie's Homegrown. If Progresso's deception is corporate polish, then Annie's Homegrown is the illusion of innocence. With its bunny mascot pastel packaging and promises of organic goodness, Annie's has managed to win the trust of millions who are tired of artificial food and industrial shortcuts. But what makes Annie's so troubling is not what they tell you, it's what they don't. The more they paint themselves as the good guy, the less room they leave for you to question what's really in the can. Annie's is owned by General Mills, one of the most powerful food conglomerates in America. That means every homemade soup they sell is backed by a supply chain as industrialized as any other brand on this list. Only with Annie's, they use soft colors and organic labels to make you feel safe. But behind the comfort marketing are ingredients linked to hidden pesticide residues, offshore processing, and a disturbing lack of full disclosure about how clean their products actually are. Let's be clear. Organic doesn't always mean safe. Several independent tests conducted in the last few years found glyphosate residues in organic labeled products from major brands, including items sold by Annie's. Glyphosate, the controversial herbicide tied to long-term health risks, has been at the center of multiple lawsuits and bans in various states. Annie's response: carefully worded silence. No admission, no denial. Just enough legal distance to keep selling the story. And then there's the supply chain. Annie's contracts out their production through a patchwork of co-packers, some of which operate in facilities also used for non-organic foods. That means cross-contamination is always a risk. And while FDA oversight is supposed to prevent this, enforcement is spotty at best, especially when companies are allowed to self-report. So while the label might say, made with organic carrots, the truth is you're trusting a system that often fails to keep those carrots separate from everything else. What makes Annie's particularly dangerous is how aggressively they target health-conscious families. Parents looking to avoid additive seniors trying to eat clean people on restricted diets. Annie's soup looks like the safer bet, but many of their varieties still contain high levels of sodium-processed thickeners and natural flavors that can legally include hundreds of undisclosed compounds. And if you have sensitivities or chronic health concerns, those hidden ingredients aren't harmless. They're ticking time bombs. Meanwhile, General Mills has spent millions lobbying against stricter labeling regulations, the very transparency Annie's fans think they're getting. They've opposed GMO disclosure bills. They've watered down definitions of natural, and they've fought to keep food manufacturers from having to identify irradiation or chemical fumigation in processing steps. It's the same old game. Make the food look better than it is. Let marketing do the work. Keep the consumer believing. So while Annie's tries to wrap itself in the warmth of farm fields and homemade charm, the reality couldn't be further. You're not buying a backyard soup made with love. You're buying into a carefully orchestrated strategy that puts image over integrity. And once you realize that every spoonful starts to feel like a lie, after everything we've uncovered so far, it almost feels impossible to trust any label again. But Amy's Kitchen stands apart for one reason. They still treat food like it matters. In an industry flooded with shortcuts, this family-owned company has managed to maintain standards without caving to corporate pressures. That alone is worth paying attention to. Number 1. Amy's Kitchen. Amy's isn't perfect, but what sets them apart is transparency. Unlike conglomerates that bury information behind vague terms or third-party contractors, Amy's has consistently kept control over its own facilities. Their soups are made in-house in certified organic kitchens, where ingredient integrity is monitored from the moment produce arrives. And while other brands scramble to meet minimum FDA compliance, Amy's often exceeds it, voluntarily disclosing allergens and processing methods most labels would rather hide. Even more importantly, Amy's doesn't chase volume for the sake of shelf space. They limit their product range to what they can actually manage without compromising. That means when they say organic lentils, it's not just a buzzword. They actually work with certified farms, many of them small scale, where the harvest is planned around real growing seasons, not year-round chemical pumping. And unlike brands that outsource to distant countries with questionable pesticide laws, Amy's sources domestically whenever possible, even if that cuts into their margins. But Amy's strength isn't just in ingredients, it's in values. This is one of the rare companies that has spoken out publicly in favor of stronger labeling laws, fair labor practices, and sustainability. And when they do hit bumps like facility slowdowns or supply shortages, they don't cut corners. They pause production, they explain delays, they stay accountable. In a world where most food companies would rather move quietly in the dark, Amy's still believes in owning their process out loud. That commitment has made them a target. In recent years, Amy's faced pressure from major retailers to cut costs and increase output. They refused. As a result, some stores reduced their shelf space. But the company stuck to its core. No synthetic preservatives, no artificial additives, no rushed packaging, no mass-produced sludge pretending to be a meal. That decision has won them one thing that's harder to buy than any ad campaign: loyalty. Real loyalty from people who've watched the industry erode and decided to draw a line. And make no mistake, that line matters. Because when one company proves that real food is still possible at scale, it forces the rest to answer uncomfortable questions. Why can't you trace your ingredients? Why are your labels so vague? Why does your soup taste like salt water and starch? Amy's doesn't have to hide. And in today's market, that makes them rare. So when everything else feels like a gamble, Amy's is one of the few names that still deserves your trust. Not because they're perfect, but because they're not playing the same game. They're not running on loopholes and legal tricks. They're not banking on confusion or nostalgia. They're doing food the hard way. And in this era, that's the only way that counts. Number 2, Pacific Foods. If Amy's reminds us that quality can still come from family roots, Pacific Foods proves that even within a large system, integrity doesn't have to disappear. Yes, the company is now under the umbrella of Campbell's, a detail that might make anyone hesitate. But Pacific has done something few brands manage to pull off after an acquisition. They kept their standards intact. And not just on paper. While most shelf-stable soup brands chase artificial efficiency, Pacific sticks to what built their name: slow cooking, real ingredients, and no synthetic shortcuts. They rely on trusted growers, often local, and they avoid genetically engineered crops, even when that means higher sourcing costs. And unlike their corporate parent, Pacific chooses paper cartons over metal cans, for many products reducing both contamination risk and waste. Their soups are certified organic, where labeled, and they don't drown everything in salt or starch to fake flavor. Instead of masking cheap fillers, they let vegetables taste like vegetables, broth taste like broth. That restraint isn't common in this aisle, and it's not an accident. Most important, Pacific Foods doesn't flood the market with endless SKUs. They refine, adjust, and quietly remove underperformers. That means you're not dealing with a company scrambling to stretch its supply chain thin just to meet retailer demands. And for those who've grown tired of being tricked by pretty packaging and dirty secrets, that kind of quiet discipline matters more than any logo or slogan ever could. So here we are. 5 brands that have betrayed trust-bent rules or pushed the limits of what's acceptable on our dinner tables, and 2 that prove it doesn't have to be this way. The truth is, you shouldn't need a magnifying glass to understand what's in your food. You shouldn't have to second-guess every can, every label, every aisle. But when the system is designed to hide behind loopholes, when profit trumps people, the burden falls on us to look closer, to demand better, to walk away from what's easy, cheap, or nostalgic, and choose what's honest, even if it's harder to find. Because every dollar we spend is a vote, not just for a brand, but for the kind of food system we want to live under. And after everything we've seen, haven't we earned better than this?
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.